Thank you, Chairman Kuipers, and thank you to the committee for allowing me to testify today about the potential transfer of Gitmo detainees to Michigan or perhaps anywhere in the United States. My position on this has been pretty clear ever since discussions on this started. I'm opposed to moving these individuals to Standish. I'm opposed to moving them to Michigan, and I believe moving them anywhere under the continental United States is a bad idea. You know, as we go through this process, and you'll see it later on in the testimony, one of the things that I do recognize is that we come at this from different points, different data points. Having served on the Intelligence Committee now for 9 years and having been actively involved with dealing with this threat from radical jihadists, I've had more of an up-close and personal look at who these individuals are, what they've done, and specifically the difficulties or the challenges that we have had in holding these folks in Guantanamo. So one of the things that I have asked the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, to become more transparent in providing more information to local and state officials by declassifying classified information so that you will have a better understanding and a better reference point as the state deals with making this decision. The other thing that I've asked is I've asked for the Department of Defense to coordinate a trip of state or to Guantanamo of state and local officials and the press so that you can have a better understanding of perhaps the differences in the facilities of Guantanamo and what you may find in Standish or what you may find in other facilities in Michigan or what we may find in Fort Leavenworth. And I think that, you know, to have a full and complete discussion and for the people of Michigan to have confidence in the decision that may be made, I think that at a minimum you ought to at least have access to that information so that you can make a more informed decision. You know, one of the interesting things is that people believe that this is a new direction about closing Gitmo. Actually, President Bush was an advocate for closing Guantanamo. But what President Bush found is very much similar to what President Obama has found. That this is a very, very difficult thing to execute and that there are challenges and risks opposed to it. Because of that information, President Bush did not close Gitmo and left it open. Because of that, I think what President Obama is finding is that he is facing the same kinds of challenges and issues that President Bush found. The conditions have not changed. So even though the President has said he wanted Gitmo closed by January 22 of 2010, the task forces that he has put in place and said, I want reports by these task forces within 6 months of the date when he made that announcement, meaning he would have wanted them by the middle of July. The task forces have missed their commitments, and so I think that they're understanding that there are real issues with closing Guantanamo that need to be dealt with, and they have not found an easy answer. And that's why I really urge the state of Michigan to be very, very cautious and very deliberative before you reach into any type of an agreement with the federal government for accepting these folks, and you understand the full ramifications of what this may mean. You know, there's two questions that the President hasn't, at least two questions that the President hasn't answered, and perhaps more. One on a national security issue and a foreign policy. Exactly what problem is the President going to solve by moving these individuals from Gitmo to the United States? You know, there's been criticism of the United States by our allies, specifically in Europe, saying, wow, you know, we think Gitmo's a terrible place. It ought to be closed. Well, I've met with my colleagues from the British Parliament. I've met with my colleagues from other parliaments in Europe and said, are you going to help us facilitate the closure of Gitmo? Will you take some of these detainees and hold them in France? Will you take some into the Netherlands? Will you take some into the UK? And they kind of start laughing and they say, no, we don't want any of these. My colleagues from the UK will say, we've taken one, and if we could have our way, we'd send him back to Gitmo because the cost of monitoring and tracking him in the UK has become a pretty significant burden on the government. Why was Gitmo open in the first place? And so why should we now close it? Gitmo was open for a number of reasons. We needed a place that could house, away from the battlefield, some of the most dangerous terrorists in the world. We needed a place off of U.S. soil because there continue to be legal questions about the transfer of legal rights, or the difference in legal rights from when these people are on non-U.S. soil to when they are transferred to U.S. soil. There are still concerns and issues about that. And the third thing was that we recognize that having them in a remote location made sense from a security standpoint. You cannot get to Guantanamo very easily, into our base there. To get there, you have to go through Fidel Castro's Cuba, or you have to come across the ocean. Neither one of those is very easy. For our folks in Gitmo, the people that are guarding these individuals, there's not any transparency there. These folks are anonymous to their prisoners. They don't wear identification. You can't identify who they are, what they do, and those types of things, other than that they provide security. Because we believe that these people that we are holding continue to be committed jihadists who want to kill Americans and who want to kill as many as possible, whether it's in Gitmo or whether it's somewhere in the United States. So we've not made it easy for people to identify who they are, where they may be from, where their families may live, and those types of things. You know, you've got a brief description of who some of these folks are: Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shid, and I think that you'll see that these are some of the worst that we have had to deal with. In the years that Gitmo has been open, we have had about 750 people that have been processed into Gitmo. There's about 229 people that are still there. Of the roughly 500 that we've released, at least 14% have been clearly identified as having gone back to the battlefield, and those are the people that we can specifically track. For those that we can't track, you can assume that many of them have also gone to the battlefield, so the 15% is a conservative estimate. These people remain committed to jihad. What are the implications of bringing these folks to the United States? You know, these individuals have shown great creativity and capability to escape from maximum security prisons in other parts of the world. There have recently been escapes in both Iraq and Afghanistan. So I have some concern about that, but I believe that our maximum security facilities here in the United States probably do provide more security. So I'm not sure that that's the biggest risk that we face. I think what I'm most concerned about is what we've done is we've taken these individuals, we've taken them from Gitmo, we've moved them to the United States, and what we've now created is, and I recognize that America is a target-rich environment, but we are now moving places like Standish, the people that are employed there, the community, and the state. We're now kind of painting a target on our back that wasn't there before. So why would we want to do this? And this is a target that says we want to make a statement about the U.S. detention, continued detention of these 229 individuals now being housed in Gitmo that have been moved to Standish. We now provide an opportunity for all kinds of bad behavior to happen within our state. Let me just summarize. I recognize that people may have different opinions. Let's get back to the basics. Let's make sure that you have the information that those of us on the Intelligence Committee have, that those of us in Congress have, so that you can make a more fully informed decision about who these people are, the threats that they pose, and what we have learned from housing them for the last 5 years. And once you have that information, you can make a better decision as to the threats that these individuals being housed in Michigan may pose. The second thing that we ought to recognize is that Michigan's future is much better than being bribed by the federal government to take 229 of the worst terrorists in the world and putting them on our soil. There's a lot of other economic activity and potential that can be moved into this state, and the question is, by housing Gitmo detainees, do we really believe that that will make Michigan a more attractive state for other people to come and invest in our state and to grow in their state and to move their families into our state? Michigan is much too good of a state to base its future on taking these individuals and moving them into our communities. I've got a lot of other points, but with that, I'd just like to summarize my statement, submit my statement, entire statement for the record, and be open to any questions or comments that you may have. Thank you.
All right. Well, we thank you for your testimony today. Can you just briefly touch on a topic that you and I have talked about briefly, and that's when these Guantanamo prisoners are brought onto American soil, what happens to them in terms of access to the benefits afforded U.S. citizens under the Constitution of the United States?
What we do know for sure, once we move them onto the continental United States, they inherit, or they are entrusted with all the civil liberties and civil protections that we have as citizens or residents of the United States. What we are unclear of, because it's a continuing shifting ground that we're working on, is exactly what civil liberties and protection they are provided in Guantanamo, but they are more limited in Guantanamo than what they are here in the United States. The one thing that they would have in the United States very clearly the day they move here is the right to habeas corpus, which says that they can challenge their detentions, and they can and they have pressed, and they will have the right to press for a speedy trial. And knowing the backgrounds of where these individuals were captured, under what circumstances they were captured, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to try a number of these people in traditional civil and a traditional criminal court. When we capture these people on the battlefield and our soldiers are still under fire, what they don't do is they don't put up the yellow ribbon and say CSI and go out and collect data that they can use in a criminal court. They are on the battlefield. They do not collect the evidence. That's what makes it so difficult.
There's a perception out there, I think, in the general population that these prisoners will be guarded by our corrections officers. You seem to imply that if the president were to and the state were to come to some sort of agreement, that these individuals would be guarded by federal staff.
My belief, and there's not been a lot of transparency between the administration and Congress at this point as to exactly how it would be structured. But my belief is, since these people are in the jurisdiction of the Department of Defense, that if they came to Michigan, it would be a Department of Defense facility where the vast majority of employees there would be employees of the Department of Defense, not the people that are currently working at the Standish facility.
Okay. And as employees of the Defense Department, not likely to have their families relocate with them.
Well, I mean, what we do in Guantanamo right now, we move these individuals in and out for a specified period of time. Again, what they would do with the facility in Michigan or housing these prisoners, it hasn't been clearly defined exactly what that process would be.
All right. Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to our esteemed guest. And it seems to me that one of the foremost responsibilities that I have under the Constitution of this state is to be on guard to watch out for public safety and general welfare. And constitutional charge is very significant in my mind. You have certainly provided testimony today, written and oral, which is compelling. And I have to ask initially, what's the level of security clearance that you have, especially compared to security clearance that I have, or perhaps even the governor has?
Well, there's a huge difference. As being the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, I have access to data which we call the Gang of Four. Gang of Four data means that there are only 4 members of the House and the Senate combined that have that information. The chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the House, the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee in the House, and then our counterparts in the Senate. So I have access to Gang of 4 and Gang of 8, which would include the leadership of the House and the Senate. So there's a significant amount of different information that I have access to than even my colleagues in the House would have, or that you would have, or that the governor would have.
So, by virtue of that testimony, even though I found the testimony that you've provided orally and in writing today as being compelling, you can't even tell me all that you know.
That is correct.
And I'm going to assume that the President has this clearance.
Yeah.
A couple of military folks have the clearance, Department of Defense. But if I take seriously my job of due diligence, in order for me to gain a level of understanding that even approaches yours, I have to be insistent before reaching any decision, even as compelling as the economic circumstance may seem enticing. We got to declassify the information, not just have access. We got to know what's going on.
I think that's why I've written the letters to DOD and to the Department of Justice, believing that you can't make this kind of decision that's been hanging out there for a number of years and that will have a significant impact on this state and this community without allowing the elected officials and the people in these communities to have access to this information and to reach a more fuller understanding of the threats that they may face because of this move, and weigh that against the economic benefits that may be promised to them by the federal government.
This might be an aside, but looking down the road, this economic benefit might be tenuous as we spend more and more into ourselves into debt at the federal level. Might be possible that they wouldn't even be able to print enough money to pay us in the future. You don't have to answer that one. That's just an aside. Putting a finer point on the point that our chair raised, the Department of Defense provides the personnel to oversee the correctional operation, which is Gitmo. And it's your considered opinion that the same type of arrangement would exist in Michigan vis-a-vis these Gitmo prisoners, detainees.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, remember, this is a special class of detainees. It'd be one thing if we were talking about moving, traditional federal prisoners, or as the state is considering moving, or accepting prisoners from California or Pennsylvania. Remember, these people have not gone through a judicial process that has resulted in a sentence to them, or them being sentenced to a time in a federal prison. So I would think that there would be major difficulties with moving these people into a traditional prison facility because they are not traditional prisoners.
And I suspect that you may not want to answer this question, but as an attorney, I'm exploring this. Would the President, if he chose to, be legally entitled to impose this Department of Defense facility on the state of Michigan in the event the governor said, no, we have a certain state here and it has certain states' rights?
Mm-hmm. Not being a lawyer, I don't know exactly what limitations there are on a state or a state legislature to restrict the president to make a decision like, or the federal government to make a decision like that.
Seems to me that, are we officially at war right now?
We are not officially at war.
So the Commander-in-Chief has certain authority, but not wartime authority.
We have actually, and we've introduced legislation along with the Republican leader in the House to make sure, what we're trying to do is to say that before any of these Gitmo detainees are moved to the continental United States, that the governor of the state to which they may be moved has to affirmatively assent to that movement of these individuals into their state.
Well, It seems to me this is, again, more of a rhetorical question, but I believe we're spending millions and millions of dollars promoting pure Michigan as a tourist destination. And I'm not sure that this necessarily is compatible. So, thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Congressman.
Hey, thank you.
You know, this is one of those issues I don't think there's an easy answer to, and I think that we all lie awake. We all, I think, have probably pulled people on our way wherever we're going. This is an issue that's come up, and I've talked to a lot of people trying to gauge their reaction, and it's nice to hear your deliberative tone today. I think that I've heard a lot of radio interviews. I've heard you talk on this issue beginning up on Mackinac Island when Tim Skubic was floating it up there. I think courtesy of John Engler, who teed this up for us, or at least that's who Skubic gave credit to. I'm glad to hear the deliberative tone, because I think that this is something that we need to be thoughtful about. We need to have a lot of robust conversation and debate about, because there are a lot of issues that we need to expend energy on and not have knee-jerk reactions to. And we need to get full information. And this is something that I know that there is little information to be shared, and a lot of people are telling us to trust them, that they know what's in our best interests, and we should be skeptical. We should take our time and ask questions. I noticed, at least in the Gongwer report that came out last night, that you have sent a letter to Attorney General, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder and Defense Secretary Robert Gates, looking for more information for yourself.
That's correct.
And so you're testifying here today to tell us that you know that these are people that we don't want in Michigan, but yet you're asking for more information for yourself. So I'm curious as to what reaction you've gotten and what information you feel that you're lacking when you're here advising us, if there's additional things that we know that you don't know that we need to know.
What do I know that I don't know, right? Thank you. No, I think the question that we are asking for is, we're not asking for more background on who these individuals are or the threat or the challenges that we have faced. We're asking more information from the President as to exactly what the plan is. Because there's a plan of moving them. There's then how you're going to deal with the new legal framework these individuals will have. If they challenge their detentions in court and they are individuals that we haven't prepared the case or we don't have the evidence that would hold up in a traditional court, are we at that point then compelled to release them? And since they are on U.S. soil, are we then compelled to release them into the United States? So those are the kinds of questions we're asking. The plan, the consequences, or the risk associated with whatever plan the President may lay out.
Okay. And so, and when you were talking earlier about if this were to happen, who would be in charge of watching over the prisoners, who would be the guards? When you say that your assumption is that they would be federal guards, but we're not sure. So,
correct.
Okay, so there are a lot of things that you're just not in a position to be able to answer. It's speculation at this juncture, based on your experience, but speculation nonetheless. The
speculation is as to how this facility would be administered in the United States, because we've asked the administration for a plan. I mean, we've had federal officials at Standish going through this and having discussions with local government officials and talking. I've heard anywhere from 1,250 jobs to 3,000 jobs guaranteed for 40 years. And you would think that before you're dealing with, as much as I respect the mayor and the city manager up in Standish and that they're capable, you would think that that information would be shared with those of us in Congress who are actually going to have to vote to fund this. And would also be shared with folks like yourself, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to create this window of expectation at the local level and then find out that either Congress is unwilling to fund or implement the plan, or that people here in Lansing are saying, well, that may be nice, but we're looking at a bigger picture than just Standish, and we think that this doesn't fit with our direction or our plan for the state. I think we should both have access to that information.
I absolutely agree with that statement, and I would hope that we would, before we said yes or no, that we would have full understanding of what the expectations were, what the long-term commitment was, what it all encompasses when you're talking about funding, transportation, the medical expenses. I mean, this is an enormous potential. It's also an enormous cost that is also attached to it, on top of all of the security issues, which I think should be and is our primary concern here. So I completely concur with that. And, moving forward, I think that it's incumbent on us as decision makers and you as decision makers in Washington, D.C., that we do have all the facts. And if we haven't learned that post 9/11 and with everything that's happened in Iraq, we have to ask questions. And if we don't, we get mired in bad decisions that we pay for in lives, in, our security, and in dollars. And we cannot afford to make mistakes that we haven't done our due diligence on. And I think that that's just the nature of all of our concerns going forward. And so I appreciate your time, Congressman.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cropsey.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming here today. I'm very impressed. First of all, I've been one of the folks in the legislature when I've been asked, because I chair the Corrections Subcommittee on Appropriation, on what are my thoughts, and my first response has been, well, I won't rule it out, but I want to know what the security implications are first and foremost. And secondly, I do want to know, who's going to be taking care of the prisoners, and thirdly, what is in it for Michigan. And that is third, because I think the first one should overshadow everything. When I take a look at your testimony, your written testimony on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, this one sends chills down my spine, that he was the driving force behind the attacks on September 11th, as well as several subsequent plots against the United States and Western targets worldwide. He also is proud that he, and I quote your quote of him, "I decapitated with my blessed right hand the head of the American Jew Daniel Pearl in the city of Karachi, Pakistan. For those who would like to confirm, there are pictures of me on the internet holding his head." I don't know that we have any prisoners in our maximum security prisons that approach this level of evil and this level of hatred for the United States that this type of man personifies. I am very concerned that we do not have good legal answers, that if they are brought here and you get it in front of a judge, a federal judge, as to whether or not this person might be walking the streets of Standish, the streets of Livonia, the streets of Lansing, because a federal judge says you don't have enough to hold him here. And you have stated that, 13 to 14% of the people that have been let go from Gitmo, we now believe are actively working militarily against the United States. Is that
We know that with a high degree of confidence that at least 14% of the people that have been released or removed from Guantanamo are back on the battlefield.
And there's been, 500 people released roughly?
That's right.
Okay. How many of those have you been able to track? I mean, is that 14 or 15% out of 100 that you know where they are?
I would guess that we probably got an ability to track 50 to 60%. Others just kind of melt back into the population. And remember, not only do we, the only way that we know that they're back on the battlefield is that we've seen them and identified them on the battlefield, as far as going back and becoming suicide bombers.
Okay. I've got two boys serving, one of which is overseas right now in one of the war zones. This is a huge concern that we have already let 500 go, and a significant percentage of them are fighting against our men and women in uniform. I mean, that's almost unconscionable that we would allow such a thing to happen. I can't believe that our president is still considering closing Gitmo. Did Congress pass legislation just recently or funding to keep the prison open?
both the House and the Senate have passed different pieces of legislation that have restricted the funds available to the President to be used to relocate folks to the United States, pending the President, the language is slightly different, but pending the President presenting a plan as to, what the plan is and what the challenges and what the risks are.
Now, I have another question for you. I was reading a newspaper article not too long ago about a scandal dealing with letters of refusal. I think there were some people that the Armenian embassy or something was selling letters of refusal, so people that were of that descent here in the United States were not the foreign country where they said they were from, said we will not take them back. Is that a serious concern that if we bring these people here and we say, we'll send them back to their country of origin, that the country of origin can say, no, we won't take them?
It's a huge concern. I mean, we haven't been able to send, we've got at least two issues here. Some of which is that the countries that are from where they're from have not taken them back. In other places, we don't want to send them back to their country where they came from because they will be,
they'll be
summarily
fighting
released.
against my boys.
Yeah,
yes.
They'll be fighting against your boys again. So yeah,
okay.
Both of those are of concern.
Okay, all right. I take a look at this and I say, just the President's going to have to come up with some very compelling reasons why Gitmo should be closed for me to say that I think it's appropriate for these people to be brought here to the United States and especially brought here to Michigan. I am waiting for President Obama to give us that, and I appreciate you being here because the level of intelligence that you have on this is certainly far more than we will probably ever get, and I do not feel. I mean, at this point, I would hope that the President would say, let's keep Gitmo open because we cannot afford to have these folks back on the field fighting against our men and women. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Now, the other state that's under consideration is Kansas.
The other state that we know that we are aware of that is under consideration is Kansas. That's Fort Leavenworth. The senators there have done very much what I'm asking be made available to you. The Senate, the two senators from Kansas have put on hold the President's nomination. And these are two Republican senators who have put on hold the nomination of a Republican congressman to become the Secretary of the Army. And they did that the last week of July before they went on recess and said, we want this we're going to place a hold on this nomination until the President presents a plan, and I believe until there is more transparency with the people of the state of Kansas about the risks associated with this move.
Okay, and I would just urge members of this committee, I mean, that's essentially what these resolutions do, is say, this is a conditional no. I mean, we want to see the information, we want more transparency, and then if we're granted that, then we can make an informed decision after the fact. So, Congressman, there's a couple more questions, and then we'll let you go. Senator Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's just assume that the issue on whether Guantanamo Bay is the facility will be closed. Let's say that's going to be resolved, and the legal issues regarding what type of standing or rights that the detainees would have if they were moved to the continental U.S. Let's say those are resolved as well. In that case, how much weight would you give to the opinions of the local community in Standish and the local elected officials? And then also, I'll just merge my other question into this. If we could also, in that scenario, get assurance that all the current employees in the current facility right now would keep their jobs, let's say at their same wages and benefit levels, how much weight would you consider that in possibly reconsidering or modifying your position right now?
I believe in, I believe in states' rights, and I believe in local control on just about every issue. Education, transportation, and those kinds of things. But I believe that this is a national security issue, and that when you for that reason, I believe that the lead decision makers on this has to be the federal government. The folks in the Department of Defense, the folks at the Department of Justice, those of us on relevant committees in Washington, D.C. I'm not sure we have the most intelligence on this issue. We've got the most background on it. Okay, we've been looking at it for the last 8 years, and so we ought to bear responsibility for whatever decision is made. We ought to consider local input. We ought to consider state input in those types of things. But again, I'm going to meet with the mayor and the city manager of Standish hopefully this week. I'm sure that they run their city very, very well, but they have not spent the last 8 years looking at the threat from radical jihadists in depth or understanding the challenges of Gitmo. And I think it's unfair to, wave the flag, wave the 40 pieces of silver in front of them on one side of economic growth, and on the other side ask them to assess the risk when they really haven't been looking at that issue and understanding it. So, sure, you got to take into account their views and their opinions, but I wouldn't want them to be the ultimate decision makers. Okay.
All right, Senator Sanborn.
Thank you, Congressman, for attending today. Appreciate your testimony and appreciate the information we spoke of briefly beforehand. I did have an opportunity, as I shared with you, to go up to Standish last week and see the signs that are up there and the outcry for people who are just struggling economically and think that this is a potential solution. And I know you're going up in the near future and you're going to see some of that. And it is, I've been going up through that area all my life. It is something that is going to tug at your heartstrings because of people suffering as they are in Michigan economically. Appreciate your testimony today, but I think what is more telling is perhaps what you can't say because you don't want to fearmonger. But I think there are some things that are probably quite obvious to some of us as some of the threats we're going to be subjected to if we make Michigan a target for terrorism. And I guess the thing that I'm concerned about and the thing that tells me this is really a bad deal is the fact that it seems like the feds are trying to dangle all this money to see who will bite at it first. Standish is a wonderful community. I just fear that they're getting sold a bill of goods, that the economic stimulation they're talking about that this is going to create is illusory at best. And like you say, Congress can always defund some of these projects, and they'll just go away. And then what have they got? It's a beautiful community. Lots of things we can do, bring into Michigan to stimulate the economy. Some of them are bad ideas. You can legalize prostitution, bad idea, tax the hell out of it. You can legalize drugs, bad idea, tax the hell out of it. This sounds like something that could potentially be a very bad idea. Mm-hmm. Thanks for being
good. Thank you.
Okay, one last question, Senator Patterson.
One last questioner. I may have more than one question.
That would be my bet.
No, we're limiting you to one question.
Well, it'll be a long one. Page 6, just to put a finer point on this, protection of detention personnel. Guantanamo inmates are currently guarded by American military personnel who cannot readily be identified by detainees. Moving them to American prisons poses significant additional risks to corrections personnel, their families, and their communities. Just as importantly, the facilities could themselves become prominent targets for terrorist attacks. I mean, that's a profound statement that I don't believe had been raised outside of this forum, at least while I was present.
Yeah, we go to great lengths in Guantanamo to hide the identity of the people that are working there because we believe that with the connections that al-Qaeda or radical jihadists or homegrown terrorists the movement may have, that identifying who these individuals are, the communities that they come from, and the families that they have and where they live is just a really bad idea to get that information out in the public. So we kind of cloak who these people are and where their families may live, again, in the interest of being overcautious on the security side. If you move these people to Standish, the people that work in that facility, whether they be guards, whether they be cooks, whether they work in the medical facility or whatever, you'll be able to know very quickly who they are, where they live, their family relationship, their kids, where they go to school. You'll be able to know all of that stuff. And I think that's a bad idea.
You made an extra effort in a sense of modesty to point out that you and the rest of the Gang of Four and others who have a certain high level of clearance may have more background but not necessarily more intelligence. I won't have to issue such a disclaimer when I make the following observation. You'll conclude that I'm not all that intelligent, I think, but I find it fascinating that there is such an allure because of an economic situation that we currently face, and yet, well, before I go any further, what's the rest of the Michigan congressional delegation's position on this issue? Have they expressed themselves?
There's mixed. I believe I think the strongest statement publicly is that we ought to take a look at it, investigate it, and evaluate it. I'm not sure whether anyone has come out in favor of the movement. A number of my colleagues have come out opposed to it.
Okay. Who was it that made the expression that we ought to take a look at it?
I believe that, Congressman Stupak wrote a letter. This is what was brought up on Mackinac Island earlier this year. And I'm not sure what the statements of Senator Levin have been.
Well, I think
it's along that same area.
I was interested in finding out if either of our senators had opined on taking a closer look at it, because I recall, by virtue of the Senate district that I represent, that our two senators reached a conclusion and campaigned on the notion that we should bar out-of-state trash. That out-of-state trash was necessarily bad, if not evil. And yet we all know that out-of-state trash, which is recognized by the U.S. Constitution as a commodity entitled to protection under the Commerce Clause, that when we reach such a bold decision with regard to out-of-state trash, on the other hand, when it's talking about out-of-state, well, not even out-of-state, international terrorists, we ought to take a closer look at it. Excuse me? What am I missing here? I'm not on the Intelligence Committee, but what am I missing here?
I think that's a rhetorical question,
It
right?
is.
Yeah, okay. Just checking. All right.
Well, Congressman, we appreciate your time today.
Great.
Thank you for
Hey, thank you.
being here and answering the questions of the
Appreciate it.
committee
Thank you.
members.
Thank you for the opportunity.